Okay, we're back, and we were just talking about the regime of appropriability, right? We said that there are four, dimensions or facets or characteristics of the situation that can make the innovator have a really good ability to capture the value or not. And we said that if it's a strong regime of appropriability, then they're able to capture the value of the innovation. Like, for example, do you remember NutraSweet, the sweetener that's found in things like Diet Coke? That was developed by a company called Searle, and they were able, with very, very strong patent protection and other complementary resources, which we'll talk about in a second, they were able to and also use lead time to control the, ability, they were able to appropriate the value of that innovation, the profits from that. So we have legal protection, things like patent, we have complementary resources, the tacitness of the technology, that's a bit, we'll talk about complementary resources later in more detail. The tacitness of the technology is about it's basically the degree to which the technology is codifiable, that is, that it can be knowledge that can be written down and transferred, and the complexity of the innovation. So imagine like making an airplane, like Boeing making a new airplane. That's really difficult for a competitor to copy, right? Because there's so much complexity to that particular, innovation, and it's something that is developed internally, in-house, and lots of, systems being, put in place, and there's lots of teams working on it, and it's codifiable, it's written down, but it's kept kind of secret. That's what tacit means. Tacit means unspoken. It's something that's not spoken. So it's almost like you could think of it as like trade secrets, something like that. Something that's kind of written or, hard to put into words, and it's complex. So the company can really hold on to that. Lead time, of course, is just, the ability to, we talked about, remember, learning curves and things like that, right? So if you're the innovator, if you use your lead time well before the competitors can catch up, then you can be farther along that curve, that learning curve, that you're making the processes, internal processes, you're getting sales, and you're building a base of users. You're getting you're perhaps even saturating the market. You're getting brand loyalty. You're using that time well, and you're constantly being ahead of the curve while your competitors are having to catch up. So that's another important way of being able to capture the value of the innovation. So here, for example, is the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, uspto.gov, and I would even recommend you guys just go check it out. They've got great, for example, if you want to check out trademarks, right? You just come up with a brand name and you think, hey, that's an interesting brand name. I want to trademark it. You can do it. I think it's a couple $100s. I just tried to trademark a brand name a few months ago. It didn't really work out too well. But it has a trademark search. You can actually search for that brand name and see if anybody's taken it. But also, you can check out what's patents, like if you have an idea for a patent. So in the top right, you see it says search for patents, search for trademarks. It's very, their website is actually quite helpful. They've got a great approach to helping people. The top 15 patent owners in 2012, just, we'll breeze through this. I just wanted to show you some examples. But look at the top several, okay? You recognize some of these names: IBM, Samsung, Sony, and LG and Microsoft. Toyota is in there, General Electric, and you see these names repeated, right? Look, this is 2012, 2014. You still see IBM, Samsung. Canon, Sony, Microsoft, these are companies that are just investing heavily in research and development, right? They're companies that are built on innovation, okay, bringing new ideas to market. Apple's in there, Intel, again, but look at the top, it's always IBM. In 2016, it's still IBM and Samsung. So the top two places, right, in 2012, 2014, 2016, hasn't changed. Um, and in the latest data that I got in 2019, IBM is still number one, Samsung is still number two, and Canon, and then now goes down, Apple is up there, LG, Intel, Sony, Google. And this is the numbers are a bit different here, so some of the companies dropped out, but still the top ones are still basically the same. So companies, they've staked their whole business models on typically, being innovative, and they're able to capture the value of those innovations. So legal protection, patent protection is important. There's different types of legal protection of intellectual property. There's patents, which gives you the rights, the exclusive rights to a new product. It could be a process, for example, this Pilkington float glass, an internal process, or a substance like a chemical compound or a design. Copyrights are the exclusive rights to artistic works. It could be a book or a play or musical, works like songs. There are trademarks, and these are, you see these for brands, words, symbols, or other marks that distinguish goods and services. And again, it's also registered with the patent office in the US. And then finally, there are what's known as trade secrets. And, trade secrets, these are things like formulas, chemical formulas, or recipes, or industrial processes, um, that are not generally known by others in the industry, and they shouldn't be, easily to obtain or to ascertain by others. And a business gains economic advantage over competitors by having these things. So these trade secrets are protected through things like non-disclosure agreements or confidentiality agreements. So the information is secret, it's not generally known or readily accessible to others in the industry, and it has to have commercial value because it's a secret. So, and it must have been, kept as a secret. The company must take reasonable steps to keep the information secret, again, through confidentiality agreements or non-disclosure agreements. We also have private contracts between firms and between a firm and its employees that restrict the transfer of technology and know-how. So, in your contract, it might say, like, if you're working within this industry, in this company, let's say you're a researcher working on drug development, pharmaceuticals, or you're a researcher working on microchips or software, then they might have a non-disclosure or confidentiality agreement that also limits your ability to work for another company in the same business. You might not be able to work for 6 months for a competitor. That's typical in some of these types of companies. Now, we talked about this issue of complementary resources, and this is a really super important aspect of this regime of appropriability. And you'll see that, the complementary resources are sometimes more important even than legal protection. So, for example, imagine that, you've got some breakthrough, like you've invented a new pharmaceutical or a new compound, like for example, NutraSweet, right? NutraSweet is a sugar replacement, right? It's a sweetener that we use that is used in soft drinks and variety of, like, candies and gum, things like that. But interestingly, I don't know if you know this, it's actually got more calories than sugar. So 1 teaspoon of sugar is like 16 calories. 1 teaspoon of NutraSweet is something like 18 calories. But of course, the trick is that NutraSweet is like more than 200 times sweeter than sugar. So of course you just use, much, much less. So Searle, this company, developed NutraSweet. That's the core technological know-how. But the trick is, it's not enough to invent it. To be able to bring it to market, imagine you've got the core technological know-how, but you need all these things like finance. You need to have the money, right, to invest in the production capabilities, in the distribution capabilities, in the manufacturing capabilities. You have to invest in order to produce enough. It's great that you've got this technology and this know-how. You've created this compound, but what are you going to do with it? You have to ramp up production to be able to sell it, and that costs a lot of money. The marketing, how do you market it? You've got to have a huge marketing and sales force to support. Like people don't know what NutraSweet is, so you need this ingredients type of marketing, like Intel Inside, to help consumers understand the value of it, so that the companies like Coca-Cola, they can make it more valuable as well for their products. You also need distribution. For example, think like pharmaceutical companies. It costs a huge amount of money to do research and development, um, but if they don't have global distribution to get the economies of scale, or to be able to sell enough to get back the investments, right? They need to have a huge global distribution network. So the thing is that if you don't have these complementary resources in-house, like luckily the company Searle had enough finance, enough, they had a sales force because they were already in this game for a long time. But actually, I think they were even acquired by a bigger company called Monsanto eventually. But if you don't have these complementary resources, then you have to acquire them. You have to get them. And that means giving up some of the value of the innovation, right? That, you've got to make some sort of contractual agreements. Maybe you license the product to make someone to manufacture it and to sell it. So in exchange, you give them 50% of the profits, right? You can't keep all the profits to yourself. So the power of the owners of these complementary resources depends on whether the resources are generic or specialized. So if there are many companies that are able to do contract manufacturing, then you can just get maybe some Chinese companies, and there might be 100 different companies that can manufacture your product. Say you've like invented some new device, and it's very simple to manufacture, so that's good. Then you don't have to give away too much of your the value of your innovation. But if it's a very highly specialized technology that's needed to make the product, to manufacture it, then you're going to have to kind of give away more of these, right? So the owners get more of the value of the innovation. They have more power. So more value will be taken by the owners of these specialized resources, and that makes sense, right? Okay, so we also then, if we are committed to make this innovation happen, but we lack these complementary resources, then we need to form some sort of alliances, right? We need to form some, get them to do it for us somehow. So here's some alternative approaches to exploiting the innovations, and they differ in terms of how much risk and how much return, right? If you take on more risk, obviously you get higher returns. It also differs in terms of the resource requirements, and we see this I'm showing this on the far left side now, risk and return and resource requirements, and then at the bottom we'll give some examples. At the top line we have this spectrum, if you will. On the far left we have licensing. On the far right, we have internal commercialization. So if you do it internally, it's extremely expensive. Um, you've got the highest risk and the highest return and lots of resource requirements. You can think if you're trying to do it yourself, like